Welcome to Young and Adulting, a podcast of the young adults community at Christ Fellowship Church. Our hope is to create a safe place for authentic conversation around the ins and outs of life as we all try to navigate following Jesus in the world we live in today. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the conversation. Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Young and Adulting. We are here in season 2, and we've been spending every week this summer, and we're going to continue to throughout the summer, talking about some of the things that you want to hear about and some of the questions that you've been asking around relationships of all kinds, all the different topics around this relationship topic that you guys want to hear about. So we are going to be talking about today one of the most asked about topics that I think we've gotten around relationships, and that is conflict. How do we do it? How do we agree? Is it okay to break up? Is there a good way to break up? Some of these questions surrounding conflict. And I'm excited because I'm joined with two of our favorite people here on the Young and Adulting podcast. They are no strangers to the podcast, but they're back with us today, Pastor Karissa Robinson and Pastor Ryan McDermott. We're so excited to have you guys. Are you ready?
Yeah, come on.
Excited.
Let's talk breakups.
Let's do it.
It's the best.
Yeah, breakups. Woohoo. So I thought we'd start off fun, okay, before we get into it. So I have a question for you. What, in your opinion, is the best breakup song of all time?
Easy.
Tell us.
Taylor Swift, All Too Well.
I can confirm.
I like the original. I know you're a 10-minute version
I'm a
gal.
10-minute girl.
I know, but I would say my second, because one is too hard, Picture to Burn. Soundtrack
Fantastic.
of my middle school career.
So we're inside the Taylor Swift realm of options. Okay.
Always.
Is it okay to veer off from Taylor Swift a little? I mean,
Maybe.
I know she's like the breakup song queen,
Yeah.
but gosh. So I have to say, I thought about, like, I haven't had a breakup in like 20 years.
Okay.
So my breakup songs are a little outdated.
Oh, man.
But honestly, when I heard that question, I thought about two things. I'm not sure anyone will have heard of either of them. But one was Dashboard Confessional.
Amazing.
All these Dashboard Confessional songs. And then the other one was, it's an Under Oath song. That was a real dramatic middle school kid Under Oath song called Reinventing Your Exit. And I would just put the windows down and scream. And
Oh my gosh.
Yep, so.
I will take your word for it.
Yeah.
You haven't heard them.
Don't Google it.
We'll link the song in the show notes.
It's in the bio. Check it out. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we are also joined by Joel in the booth over there switching for us. So Joel, what is it? What's your favorite breakup song of all time?
I feel like I have to get back on the Taylor Swift train and say, it's just, I also haven't had a breakup in years, but We Are Never Getting Back Together, I feel like is a great option.
Anthem.
Oh, that is a good one. That is a good one.
No one
I
does it
will
better.
say, I did look up the top breakup songs on Spotify right now, and the first one that comes up is Driver's License. Who sings that? What's her name?
Olivia Rodrigo.
Yeah.
I would say it's
Great
up there.
song.
It's up there.
It's
for
up
sure.
there. I just can't relate. Can't relate. Like you said.
It takes you back to like they were only relevant like middle school, high school, like whenever you were experiencing it. So the new ones don't mean as much to me.
But I still sing them like I was broken up with yesterday, but I'm like
agree.
happily married 6 years.
Agree. All right. Well, then let's talk about it. Breakups. Can you break up well? What do you think?
Oh, I'm excellent at it.
Expert.
I don't think it's. I mean, can you be good at that?
I don't know if there's like somebody that's perfected the breakup.
Right.
I'm
Just
not sure.
people with more experience.
Is it a frequency thing? Is it a method? I'm not sure.
I do think there are best practices, right? There's like some do's and don'ts. I would say the first don't that comes to mind is don't use the excuse, God told me to do this. Don't be that person. Just don't. It's so mean.
But what if he did? No, I'm just.
He
You're one of
better
those.
Still
he
don't
better
say it.
have actually told you if you're going to use that excuse. I think what it implies is like God's on my side and not on yours.
Oh, wow,
or like you don't hear God, only I hear God. You know, I think it implies a lot of things that could potentially really hurt someone and maybe fracture their faith. And so I do not appreciate that excuse for breakups.
For me, that falls under the category of like, it might be true, but it's not helpful. Just don't say it. I think another don't is like, don't do it by text message, or make sure you do it in person.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear a lot of stories actually about that.
Or Instagram DMs, similar vibe.
Yeah, that's even worse.
Or just like don't ghost them. Like that's not a good approach. Just like altogether stop responding completely.
Right.
Not a good approach to
Yeah,
break
that
up.
would be a do, right? Like have the conversation, like actually tell somebody how you're feeling. I was thinking about that scene in The Office where Erin says that she's still dating her first grade boyfriend because they never broke up. So like you have to at some point have the hard conversation and actually do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think of a couple do's that might be helpful if you've been broken up with or if you had a breakup was to just process it productively. I think so many of us, our tendency is to verbally process absolutely everything with absolutely everyone. And I just don't know if that's ever been a good, productive approach to dealing with anything hard, right? Like if you talk to everyone about it, you're constantly rehearsing this. You're constantly pulling in people into like your heartbreak and your drama. But I do think processing it verbally is helpful. I think there's probably a select trusted few we should process it with. People that are actually going to help us zoom out, see the bigger picture, call out the things that maybe we can't see. So I think processing it productively feels like a good do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having that conversation with people who know both of you well.
Yeah.
People who aren't just going to like take your sides or like reinforce your perspective or whatever, but actually somebody who knows enough about you personally and about the relationship as a whole. I think can be helpful.
And I think that's so important because when you're in a relationship, you're too close, right?
Yeah.
Like you're too close to the situation, you're too close to the breakup, you're too close to the problem. Everything is skewed, everything is blurry. And so a separate party, an outside party, I feel like this is just there's so much experience around this table. Pastor Ryan was one of those people for me, and at the time was my boyfriend, Cole, now my husband. Amazing. Praise God. He's done a beautiful work in our life. But when we broke up and it got back together multiple times, I wouldn't recommend it. But Pastor Ryan was kind of like this voice that loved both of us dearly, at least I think. And no, he did. And was able to help us see things that we just couldn't see because we were too close to the problem.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an encouragement, I hope, is like, sometimes in relationships, breakups are a part of the journey and it's part of the story and it's not always bad.
Right.
Sometimes I wouldn't like recommend it necessarily like, oh, just break up for a while and see what happens. But I guess what I would point to is just the hope of like, even if a breakup or breakups are a part of your journey, like the Lord can still use it and redeem it, and obviously has worked beautifully in your relationship.
Yeah. But I think a breakup in general is going to be painful and hard and difficult. Anything that breaks is going to be painful, right? It's going to hurt a bit, and I do think there is a piece of like grieving and processing and forgiving people, right? Yeah. And I think that's an important part to recognize. We can't just jump from one breakup to the next relationship. We can't just jump from one painful thing in our life to the next thing to potentially take the risk of getting broken up with again. I think we have to recognize that there is a hurt, there is a pain, and we need to deal with it. We need to process it.
Yeah, I think a couple patterns that can like emerge out of a breakup. One would be in order to cope with the pain of feeling lonely or being disappointed, I go quickly to the next relationship, which is never, ever a good idea, ever, for any reason. So I think just being aware of that, and maybe if you have that tendency, inviting the right person to like hold you accountable so that you're not just being comforted by the next relationship and just using it as a coping mechanism. I think the other thing that happens is sometimes when you break up, that the reason for that is like so prominent in your thinking that when you look for the next person, you just look for that one thing. Like you kind of get focused on just looking for somebody who doesn't have that one thing. And you kind of run to a relationship because it's not like the last one, sort of forgetting that there's a whole lot of other things that matter, not just that one thing that you broke up over. And so I think whenever you're kind of processing and healing from a breakup, you have to be really mindful of that in your next relationship, whatever that might look like.
That's great.
Yeah, this is great. And I think I, like Karissa, have some experience to bring to the table in the area.
I wasn't going to bring it up, either of
I'll
you.
Confess,
I wasn't going to throw either of you under the bus.
That's kind of you. It's very kind.
Yeah, so I too have the wonderful husband that I am now married to. We did have to try a few times, and we broke up a few times, and we got back together a few times, and both Pastor Karissa and Pastor Ryan were huge players in helping us work through that season. But a feeling I do know that I felt was like a little bit of shame around just the mess that we felt like we were in, and I think I wish I would have taken that advice back in that season to, you don't need to process everything with everyone. And we had just kind of made a little bit of a mess. And I remember moments of feeling like, what are people going to think of me? Or what's it going to look like when people find out that we're getting married and they're going to go, didn't you guys break up and get back together like 10 times? It wasn't 10 times, just to be clear. But I would love to speak to that feeling that young adults might be having. Is it okay to try a few times and figure it out a few times and maybe mess up a few times? Is it okay to break up and make up and go through some of those things?
Yeah. Well, if it's not okay to mess up in your relationships, we wouldn't have any, right? Like we all mess up in all of our relationships. And so, relationships are worth fighting for. They are messy. You're going to make mistakes. Like all of the things that we kind of know to be true, like for some reason when it comes to conversations about dating and breakup, like sometimes they don't always apply for whatever reason. And I think to what you're speaking to, like there can be that sense of like shame or embarrassment or whatever it might be, feeling like, well, everybody knows. But the most beautiful things are worth fighting for. And I think about, how much stronger relationships are on the other side of those, like sometimes very necessary conversations,
It's great.
And I think a lot of people have your stories. Like your relationships would not be what they are today absent of some of those conversations.
Right.
And so you don't have to break up to get to those conversations, but sometimes you find yourself there, and that's shouldn't be embarrassing. If you're willing to fight for the relationship, I think that in and of itself is a great place to start.
Yeah, I think it is. It is tough, and I do think there is some embarrassment, like you said, some shame around it. And I think part of protecting yourself from that is the processing productively. Because if you don't let everyone in on every detail of your story, they're not on the roller coaster with you, right? Like they don't know the ins and outs and breakup and makeup and now. Like they might see whatever you post on Instagram, which is probably not going to be like, we broke up yesterday. Click, like post that picture. Maybe you do that, but maybe you shouldn't because
they just notice what you delete. You just all of the pictures magically disappear. Nobody posts about it, but they do in a way.
You don't have to fully commit to deleting. You just archive, and then if you get back together, pop it back up. There it is. I've never done that, just for the record, but there's a life hack for you guys. But I will say, if you're not bringing everyone in on every detail of the journey, you don't have to have all of that embarrassment and shame. If you're trusting a few, these are the few people that are there, that are not judging, that are not shaming you, that are not embarrassing you. Those are the people you need to let in on the details, but you don't have to let everyone in.
Yeah.
I will say, there are consequences to doing this, right? Yeah. To breaking up and making up and breaking up and making up. It's a lot of heartbreak to sign up for. Right. It's literally like signing up for a roller coaster of heartbreak. And I just don't know that I would fully recommend it. I do think sometimes it's necessary, but I don't know. It doesn't go without consequence. And I will say every time, like for me and Cole specifically, every time we broke up and got back together and broke up, got back together, it breaks down the trust and safety of a relationship, right? Like anytime you leave someone or reject someone or abandon someone, you just chisel away.
Are you just going to do it again?
Right. Yeah. You chisel away at the trust and the safety of what a relationship is supposed to feel like. Yeah, so it doesn't go without consequence.
Yeah. And I think through this conversation, like dating is hard and figuring it out is hard. And I think sometimes as young adults, especially since we all process and navigate conflict differently, we all have different styles in that way. It's sometimes hard to identify, like, is this an issue we're having? Is this an argument that we can't agree on, we're trying to work through? Or is this like a fundamental part of the relationship and like maybe we need to consider ending it? So how do we find or identify what the line is between this is probably just something we need to talk through, work it out, process, maybe speak to someone, a third party that can help us, or I don't think this is something that's going to get worked out. Yeah. Maybe it's time to think about moving on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think obviously there are some like worldview type issues that when it comes down to it, like, you know, there is a sense of just being incompatible. And I think knowing what those things are is really important. You know, for me, one of those things would be faith and how you feel about your faith and your worldview. And for me, I think if it comes down to like, you know, entering into a relationship with someone who doesn't share your values, your faith, your Christian worldview, there's a lot of incompatibility there.
Yeah.
That's not something that should be overlooked, you know. Now, if that is there as a foundation, then you're starting from a stronger place. And there's a lot of conversations that still need to happen. But, you know, that would be an issue for me. Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the biggest issues in a relationship is just communication. You know, like you're different people with different experiences and different perspectives, and you got to figure out how to actually like share those things and listen to somebody, and you know, like, and communication is really hard. So a lot of relationship issues boil down to that. And I think when it's like that, when it's like you don't understand me, or I feel like I'm not heard, or like there are tools, there are things that you can do to actually improve that. And I think in part it comes back to like, what do I actually think love is, and what is the purpose of a relationship? And at the end of the day, if my willingness to be in a relationship is based on how I feel about it at any given moment, it's not going to work, you know, like, because there are days I don't feel like loving my wife. Is that like, I don't know if that's okay to say, I don't know, but like, I don't feel like it. And if I make relationship decisions based on how I feel, well, today I feel selfish. Today I want to do what I want to do. That's a disaster for a relationship, right? But the goal is like every day you wake up and you make the decision to put the needs of the other person ahead of your own. And if you can do that, then this will work, you know? So I think it's partly understanding like you're not always going to feel like it, and not everything is going to work. And actually probably fighting is a part of maintaining a healthy relationship. How you fight, really important, you know, but having conversations, having disagreement, figuring those things out. If you're not willing to do that, then that's not a relationship.
Yeah. I think that's so good. And I do think there are some obvious red flags, right? There are obvious red flags. It's like, this is not something you should stay in, right? You should break up with this person tomorrow. And I think one of those things is like, if every voice around you is saying this is not a good idea, then it's not a good idea, right?
That's right.
Period. That's it. End it. It's over.
Yeah, and that was one of my like big breakup stories in high school. Was like literally every single person in my life was like, "This is a bad idea. Why would you do this?" And I was like, "Whatever." I just didn't care. And then when everything fell apart in like a completely horrible, tragic kind of way, I mean, they were gracious. They didn't say I told you so, but it was like, this could have been avoided.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think listening to people around you is incredibly important. And I would say, too, like another red flag would be like, and this is maybe obvious, but I do think there's a lot of people who just find themselves in a cycle like this. Like, if they're not wholeheartedly committed to you and you alone, like, get out. People who cheat always cheat. Like, that doesn't change. So, now the Lord can do anything. He can restore. And he can, but there's a pattern of behavior, and that is a major red flag, especially in an early stage of a relationship. It's trauma that you don't have to put yourself through.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and if this person is maybe not pulling you away from the things of God, like you mentioned, this faith foundation is so important. Yeah, and maybe they're not pulling you away. They're not stopping you from going to church, or not stopping you from, but maybe they're just distracting you. Like, oh, church isn't that important this week, but then it becomes like church isn't really that important at all. Right. Or your small group, said something that I don't really agree with, so you should stop going to that small group. Or maybe there's just some distractions that are causing you to pull away from the things you know you need to keep showing up to. I think in that situation, maybe it's not a red flag, definitely a yellow flag.
It will become a red flag.
Exactly. Yeah. You're on the way.
Yeah, like play the tape forward, right? So if that's true in a relationship now, then when you're engaged and you want to do a prep for marriage, or you get married, you know, or fast forward even more, like you have kids with that person, faith or, you know, involvement in church, engagement in church, not important for them, is important for you. Now what do we do with our kids? Like it only gets more and more complicated. So if you can't get on the same page about some of those things, it's important.
I think somebody said it this way. They said, whatever problems or struggles you faced while you were dating, they only exaggerate in marriage. And so if those problems and struggles aren't on a journey forward, or are just ones that you're going to draw the line at and say, I'm not interested in fighting this battle for the rest of my life, you know, with this person, it might be time to get out. But I think on the other hand, it's important to note when you're holding this measuring stick up to someone, you know, and saying, like, judging their life, we have to be really careful, right? Because, like, my 21-year-old self dating my husband, Cole, or my boyfriend at the time, Cole, you know, it would be unfair for me to expect 21-year-old Cole to have the faith of 30, how old are you, 30? Okay, 30-ish, 30-ish-year-old Ryan.
Under Oath was my breakup song, so old, 30 old.
Oh my gosh.
Or, you know, like, or the faith of Pastor Todd Mullins. You know, 21-year-old Cole is not going to be walking with Jesus as long as Pastor Todd has, and he's not going to have the life experience. And so when I'm holding this measuring stick up to his life going, oh, should I date him? Should I not? Should I break up with him? It would be unfair and unrealistic to expect him to act like he's had a relationship for 45 years and he's just an expert at 21 years old.
Yeah, no, that's really great and so fair and important. I think it's a matter of trajectory. It's like, it's not that they are there, but is their life headed in that direction? And I do think that's something that can be evaluated, judged as, you know, like that's part of what you're saying is like, we don't want to place judgment on these people, but from what I can see and what I can tell, is their life headed in that direction? And are we headed in the same direction? Like, I always think of this story. There was like a plane that took off from New Zealand, and when they took off, they entered the coordinates of where they were heading wrong. They were 2 degrees off. And because they were 2 degrees off, like if you're only flying for an hour, it might not be that big of a deal. But the longer they went, the farther apart they got off their flight, which ultimately caused them to crash. And it was simply like a small calibration. And so you kind of go like, all right, you know, like if their life is heading in a different direction than mine, that may not feel like a big deal now, but the farther we go, the farther apart we get, that's going to be an issue. So I think it's a trajectory thing. It's like, do I feel like they're becoming the kind of person? And more importantly, perhaps, like, am I becoming the kind of person that I need to be for this relationship, and where are we headed together?
Yeah, I've heard it said it this way: our life is made up of a cup of small steps every day, right? Somebody said it way more eloquently than that, but
that was good.
Small steps every day, right? And if the small choices and the small steps are not looking good, you're headed. Yeah, you're headed in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I would call these non-negotiables. I'm a very big advocate for the non-negotiables, like having a list, if you will, of like a few things that I'm like, if these don't exist in a relationship or in someone, or if these things start to become compromised in a relationship, that's a non-negotiable for me, and I will not compromise that.
Yeah.
Like
and if they wear Crocs.
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding. If they love cilantro. Just
I love cilantro. That's just your non-negotiable.
You came for a very large population right now.
I know, right? Cut them out. No, I'm just kidding. Give us 2 or 3 of those non-negotiables. Yeah,
it's similar to what you said earlier. I think having a faith in Jesus, being a Christian, like that was a non-negotiable for me. I just know that's the direction of my life that I'm heading in. So if I'm gonna step into a relationship with someone who's not on that page with me, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I don't want to change anyone or convince anyone of anything in a dating relationship. So that's certainly a non-negotiable for me. And
I'll tell you a non-negotiable for me.
Yes.
Selfishness. I just really value generosity, and that's so valuable to me. And so I know that if I had married someone, thank God I didn't. If I had married someone that was selfish, it was going to be hard for me to be generous, because when you get married, you share everything, right? And I knew what I wanted to do with my finances and my resources and my life. I wanted to serve and I wanted to give. I want to do that. And so marrying someone that didn't have that perspective was going to be a really big problem for me.
That's awesome. A great example.
Yep.
Are there maybe like one or two more things, like practical things, checks that people can make, or like practices in the moment of conflict? Like we're in the middle of a disagreement. Some steps that you might take back to go, okay, what's happening? How do we move forward from here? Are there some tricks of the trade that you've maybe implemented in your relationships that have helped you in those moments?
Yeah, we have a few. I don't know that any of them will translate to other people, but we made a New Year's resolution one year where we said for the entire year we're not going to fight.
I remember this. This is a couple years ago. You and Christine
did this, right? It was a
bold
bold prayer at the time.
You guys are crazy.
And what I figured out was we weren't perfect, but I could count on one hand in that year the number of times that we actually had a fight.
Wow.
And I don't think that has anything to do with us. I actually think anybody could do that. But I think sort of establishing this commitment of like, that's not who we want to be, and we want to make sure, we want to be intentional about when things start to look like it's going that way, oh no, we've already made a commitment. And so it actually helped us to just kind of set out on a goal together. So I think if you have a goal as a couple, whatever that goal might be, I think that's really helpful to just kind of set your eyes on something. I think the Bible works. So like, don't go to bed with anger in your heart, like to have the conversation beforehand. I think things like that actually make a big difference. For me, like whenever there's a disagreement, like I want to fix it. I want to
Same.
Okay, all right. But there's usually the other person in the relationship who's like, I just need a minute, or whatever.
Yep.
And so I think learning how the person you're in a relationship, how they communicate, how they respond when they're frustrated, how they deal with those things, and then allowing them the space to do that. Because the more I try to fix it, Christine prefers to have a little space and come back, and the more I try to fix it, the worse it gets, right? So I think just knowing the other person, like if I got hurt physically, I would want you to leave me alone. Like just if I'm cut, if I'm hurt, if I'm bleeding, I'm like, just give me space, leave me alone. Don't ask me a question. When I'm feeling better, we'll talk, And Christine would like want attention. Like if she got hurt physically, she would want somebody who would come over and care for her. Naturally, that actually makes a lot more sense than what I do. But even just knowing that about like how somebody responds in situations like that, and then being able to intentionally and thoughtfully approach a problem or a hurt or conflict in that way, I think it just comes down to like learning your spouse and making commitments together.
It's great. I tend to be super combative or maybe overly aggressive in conflict. And I know that about myself, so I have to be really intentional to not be that. And if you're thinking, she's probably an 8 on the Enneagram, you're right. And so, I think I am. I don't know.
Type people here.
I'm a child of God first, but I'm an 8 mostly. and that's when like the unhealthy side of me comes out. And I recognize at one point, I realize I'm like, man, nothing gets solved when I yell. Nothing gets solved when I'm overly aggressive and assertive. Nothing actually gets solved. Nothing gets better about our relationship. No problem or conflict gets solved when it's so heated.
Yeah.
And so I've had to recognize when I'm really upset that I just got to take it down.
Yep.
Simmer down, my girl. And so that's what I do. I need some space before I solve the problem. Not because I want space, but because for the sake of us moving forward, I need space. And I do think the other thing is sometimes maybe this is just a me problem, me and Cole, but sometimes the problem becomes not the problem anymore. Have you ever found yourself like in a fight with anyone, your spouse, your boyfriend, your friend, and you started fighting about one thing, but you're so deep into this argument or into this fight that you don't even know what you're mad about anymore, but you're just mad about everything. Anybody? Can anybody have
no, sorry. I'm like,
amen.
I'm replaying in my head.
I'm like, wow. And so this is so silly, but I think it's really helpful is to write down what the actual problem is at the beginning of it, because you're like, you're fighting about which place to go to for dinner, but now 10 minutes into the conversation, you're fighting about the thing that happened 3 years ago. And you're like, why did this even start? What are we even solving? What is going on here? And nothing gets solved because you forget. And I do think, just recognizing what the actual initial problem was, going back to it and addressing that, because it gets lost.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And just to be really super practical, like address it when it's small. Like the longer you wait, the bigger it gets. Yeah. So you just got to go right to it. Be less offended, like offendable, like just when people say things, like you have to be less offendable and just understand that they probably didn't mean to say it the way that you took it. And so ask questions, be less offendable, and then avoid like superlative statements. So like, you always blah, 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 whatever, or you never even, just like, no.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't feel like.
Here and there.
Yeah, like you just avoid, because you do. You turn it into something else. And like you said, all of a sudden you're arguing about things that like weren't even a part of the conversation. So I think just to be practical, like be less offendable, address it when it's small, and avoid statements like always and never.
Pastor Ryan, you've said 2 things to me that have stuck with me. You said
just
address. Only these 2. Are good. These are good.
I mean, Karissa, we've been friends for like
long time,
10 years. So 2 things.
Only 2. You've only ever said 2 things to me.
It's not a good success.
2 things that have stuck with me. You've said assume ignorance. Right? Avoid cynicism at all costs, because that's my lean. And so I have to be careful with that, which means assume that they have no idea, that they offended you, that they hurt you, so lead with that, right? Approach a conflict with that. You probably had no idea that you did this to me and it hurt me. And that's a really helpful way to approach a conversation. Thank you, Pastor Ryan. The other thing you said, the only thing you've ever said to me was address things early and often. Yeah. And so I say that to myself all the time. I'm like, early and often. Then you don't blow up, right? You don't wait, blow up, huge fight. You're like, early and often. It's not really a big deal, but I just want to bring this up. And those have been really helpful for me.
It's encouraging to know that something I said.
2 things.
I actually remember, Kasey, if I could just tell a quick personal, I remember some of the conversations with you and Gabe when you guys were going through some of that. And I remember talking about how, 99% of like the issues in our relationship come out of one of 3 things, like expectation, communication, and selfishness. And we've really hit on all 3 of those things already. But, so many of the conflict in relationships go like, I thought you were going to, or I expected that you, and I never told you that. I unfairly expect, or whatever, just like the expectations we have on the other person. So like, think about those things, call them out, talk about them. Communication is obvious. We've spent a lot of our time talking about communication, but then going back to what you said is like a, huge red flag, non-negotiable, like selfishness. If you can't learn to place the needs of others before yourself, none of your relationships will ever be healthy. So I do think that is really important, what you brought up, and worth saying again.
Yeah, this has all been so helpful. And I think the truth is that this stuff applies to any kind of relationship, right? Like conflict at work. You don't need to process everything with everyone. Process productively. Or if you have conflict with family, friends, anyone, not even just a dating or marital relationship, this stuff is so applicable and so helpful. Address it when it's small. Don't go to bed angry. Like, be aware of how the person in front of you operates in conflict. Be self-aware of how you function in conflict. And this has just been so helpful for all of that.
No, I think that's a great point. Don't get good at dating.
Yeah.
Like, get really good at relationships.
True.
It's great.
And the rest will come.
And on that, I have our final question that we've asked everyone of season 2 as the final question of our episode. And Pastor Karissa, I know you already answered, but if you have a second answer, feel free to throw it in there. But Pastor Ryan, what is the best piece of relationship advice you've ever been given?
Oh, gosh. I just spit all of them out. I've got nothing left.
In one sentence, then. Sum it up for us.
Be a duck.
What?
Yeah.
I've heard this one, actually.
I shared this with you. This is probably the worst illustration ever.
Oh, it's great.
Okay,
so ducks have this special oil on their backs where their feathers don't get wet.
Whoa.
So like even if they're even if they're in water, the water just beads and comes right off. They never actually get wet.
Amazing.
And so it's going back to what we talked about of like be less offendable. You know, it's just like let stuff roll off your back.
Yeah.
And the more you can do that, where like, yeah, it comes, but like it's not sticking with you. You know, it just really kind of rolls off your back. I think that's maybe not just in relationships, but I think that's helpful advice of just like, man, if we're just less offendable and we let things roll off our backs and we don't let things stick to us, then I don't know. I think that advice will serve you well.
Fantastic.
Be a duck.
That's beautiful.
Write that down.
Terrible.
Hey, I do have one thought. It's more of maybe a testimony since I'm the expert on this matter. No, but way back when Cole and I broke up for the first time, it was really devastating to me. And I just want to speak to anybody that's on the other side of a breakup and feeling this deep, broken heart feeling. And it's a really, really painful place to be in. And I don't want to discredit anyone that's on the other side of a breakup just feeling that broken heart, because it's really painful and it's a really tough season. And I just want to encourage you, when Cole and I broke up for the first of a few times,
I get it.
It was really hard for me. It was so painful. I felt like my life was ending. It feels dramatic to say at this point because I'm on the other side, but when you're in the middle of it, it feels like that. It feels like your life is ending. You miss the person. You miss the moment. And I felt like during that season, the scripture was so true in my life that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He comforts those who mourn. I know when my daughter is brokenhearted or mourning or sad, I pick her up and I hold her, and I believe that's what God does for us. He's so close to us, and we can lean into Him in a really special way in that season. And I felt like God spoke to me. He said that I do good work, so let me do it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what He did in my life. He has done a great work in my life and in Cole's life, and I'm grateful for the hard seasons because those are mile markers and moments that have grown us in our relationship. So if you're there, there's hope, and I'm praying for you because it's a tough season.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. This has been so great.
Awesome.
And thank you guys for just going there and being honest. And I think if anything, it's important for our young adults listening to know that you're not crazy. You're not alone. We've all been there. We've all had to walk through these things or are walking through these things. So I'm excited for us to learn and to grow and get good at relationships, all of us together. So I know I'm going to come back and listen to this one for me. Even though I'm sitting here right now, this stuff is gold. So thank you guys for joining us, and thanks for joining us and listening or watching wherever you're tuning in from. We're so excited for season 2 of Young and Adulting, getting great at relationships together, and we'll see you back next week for another episode.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Young and Adulting. Follow us on Instagram at cf.youngadults. And if there's a topic you'd like to talk about, we want to hear about it. Send us an email or leave a comment with your thoughts. We'll see you next time.